All right. Good morning. I want to thank everybody for showing up. We're going to have a short class this morning about preparing for emergencies and disasters in your home so that when these things happen, and they do, you're ready to deal with it and ready to get through it in one piece, and then handling it in the moment also helps you get to a point where you get to recover better. So the aftermath is not as disastrous. So everybody should have a handout. There's actually 3 pieces there. There's a copy of the slideshow that we're going to go through on top. That's the one we're going to go through a bit by bit. The other 2 pieces on the back, you can kind of put those aside for a moment, and I'll touch on those briefly at the end when we're almost done. Okay? Anyway. Moving on, real brief agenda. We're going to talk about the difference between a disaster and an emergency. They do sound a lot alike, but your disaster might be an emergency. Your emergency could be a disaster, but there are some distinctions. You need to be prepared for both, and so we're going to talk about doing that. There's a lot of common ground, a lot of overlap, but some specifics for each side. We're also going to talk about planning ahead. That's kind of the focus of what we're doing today, so that you can set yourself up at home, away from home, and be ready to deal with anything that comes up. We'll be talking about in the moment, and that means when something goes down, when you have something big that happens, your immediate response, your immediate reaction, you need to think about ahead of time. You need to think about what you're going to do when those things happen, because trying to figure it out in the midst of chaos and crisis is not a good idea. You got to plan ahead of time. It comes out a whole lot better for you. And then finally, at the end, we're going to talk about recovery, what to do afterwards to kind of put your life back on track to get things back to normal. Okay? Good. And emergencies happen, disasters happen. Being prepared, knowing what to do when they happen, being prepared, knowing how to take care of yourself, take care of your kids, deal with the situation is very important. That's kind of the focus of what we're doing today. We're going to talk a little bit, like I said, about the difference between the two. So an emergency is basically any crisis moment situation where yours or someone's life, health, and safety are at serious risk and needs immediate intervention, okay? So a lot of different kinds of emergencies come up. We could talk about your house is on fire. You could be in a car accident. Somebody could be breaking into your house or your apartment in the middle of the night. That person could then attack you and assault you. Those are all emergencies. Some kind of damage to your house. A tree can fall on your house. Somebody could miss a turn in the road, run up on the curb, and park in your living room. I've known people that's actually happened to. So all of these are emergencies. Locking your keys in your car and not being able to go to the store is not really an emergency.
Unless there's a kid.
I was just going to say, unless there's a baby locked in the car. Now we're talking, because then we've got somebody whose life and safety and health are at immediate risk. Okay, so those are emergencies. And your response to an emergency is going to be more immediate and more specific. It's generally speaking, an emergency is going to be something that impacts you and your family and the close people around you. It's not necessarily going to impact your whole neighborhood. That's where a disaster comes in. A disaster is something that is bigger, is more epic, it's more widespread. It's generally going to affect a large area. Maybe a neighborhood, maybe a whole town, maybe a whole state, depending on how big and how bad it is. We think about the kinds of disasters that we hear about in the news, the things that come up. If you live on the East Coast, you live in the South, on the Gulf Coast, you're going to deal with hurricanes. The positive to hurricanes is you know they're coming because it's on the news for about a week or 2 before it ever gets there. So people have a chance to get out of the way. We talk about tornadoes, same thing in the Midwest and central states. You don't really have the kind of warning that you have with hurricanes, but usually there's some kind of heads up. There's a tornado warning going. People go live in the cellar until it passes. Sometimes when you come out of the cellar, the house is gone, but at least you're alive. That's the positive of that one. Floods and wildfires, We do have to deal with wildfires here in California from time to time. Fortunately, most of them are in more remote areas and don't necessarily impact communities. but occasionally they do burn down into neighborhoods at times. Floods are not that big of a deal here in the state, in California either. Although if you get back in the Midwest and in the South where they have the big rivers like the Mississippi and the Missouri, those tend to flood on a semi-regular basis. And when they flood, they're epic floods. They cover huge areas, okay? The big one for us, obviously, is going to be the earthquake. We do actually have a couple of pretty major fault lines close to Bakersfield. Out to the east here, along the foot of the Tehachapi Mountains, is the White Wolf Fault. The last big earthquake on the White Wolf was in 1952, pretty much leveled downtown Bakersfield. The other one is kind of the granddaddy of earthquake faults, the San Andreas, that runs from Baja California all the way up north to north of San Francisco, where it heads out to the ocean. If you drive to LA, you're on I-5, when you pass Fort Tejon, the state park up there, you're driving across the San Andreas fault line. So if that one, I shouldn't say if, I should say when that one someday cuts loose, it has the potential to be a historic level earthquake that is definitely going to impact us here in Bakersfield. How big, how bad is all just going to depend on how much slippage there is on that fault line when it goes. Okay? We also talk about non-natural disasters, something like a civil disturbance or a big riot. Probably everybody remembers a couple of years ago, or about 3 years ago, all of the big riots around the country over the BLM issue and a lot of stuff that was going on there. Those things a lot of times happen in urban areas, big cities. They happen downtown in the business districts, but they can spill over into a residential area, and it can have the same impact that another disaster does, which is basically disrupting your normal life. Your business, you can't go to work, you can't do a lot of the things that you normally do. A lot of the services that are typically available aren't there anymore, or for a while they're gone. Okay, so we'll talk about some of those things that happen. A lot of times in a disaster, your basic utilities are gone. No power, gas might be out, your gas line in an earthquake, the gas line to the house might be broken. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Your water line, your water service may be out of order. If your water supply is dependent upon a pump applying pressure into the system, power goes out, you're going to lose water as well. I actually went through something like that some years ago. I lived in a neighborhood where we had 2 wells in the neighborhood, and our water supply came from those 2 wells, and the pumps had to be running in order to have water pressure. Pumps go out for whatever reason. There's about an hour's worth of pressure in the lines. We had no power for a week and a half, so we had no water for a week and a half. So that was a little bit different. Anyway, emergency services. Oh, and cell phones. If the power's out, cell phone towers don't work. If cell phone towers don't work, your phone's good for playing solitaire on, but that's about it. You won't be able to make phone calls. You won't be able to reach those emergency services. If you do manage to somehow get a hold of emergency services through something like 911, they're probably going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be so swamped with calls that they may not be able to get to you. I know nobody here is really old enough to remember the San Francisco earthquake in 1989, but I remember watching news stories about how emergency teams out in the field weren't even responding to radio calls from dispatch because they were so busy dealing with the people on the ground right in front of them. And they would work with one person and solve their problem and fix whatever was going on there. And before they could do anything else, turn around and there's somebody else. And it was just like that nonstop for about 3 days around the clock. So emergency services will probably be completely overwhelmed, and that's assuming that you can even reach them in the first place, which is not a guarantee. Okay, so being prepared means being ready to deal with a lot of this stuff on your own. Streets and roads could be closed. If we have an earthquake, overpasses the freeways, bridges over roads could be coming down, could be blocked. Buildings could collapse and block streets and roads. So transportation is also going to be very, very impacted. A lot of stores and businesses, again, no power, they shut down. You can't get in and out. you can't do business if you don't have electricity. Even if somebody does manage to get power running to their store, if the network in general is down, now that we do so much of our business by with cards and electronically, when that network shuts down, that stops business from going on. So even if you can get to a store and they happen to be open, your debit card, your EBT card, your credit card may not work because they don't have a connection to a system that will let you use it. At the same time, banks and ATMs are probably going to be out of order also. They use the same network system. They use the same computers. They can't give you your money out of your account because they can't access the computer records that show how much you have. So that's going to be an issue as well. Okay, so being prepared to respond and to deal with these kind of situations really kind of falls into one of two categories. The first one is going to be a shelter in place, and it's just exactly what it sounds like. It means you're going to stay at home, you're going to stay in your house where it's safe, where you can have more control over the environment. You may not have electricity, you may not have running water, and that's why you need to prepare your home to be ready to be there for an extended time and deal with whatever comes up. The other option is what we'd call an evacuation or relocation. This would come into play if your house isn't safe. Maybe you've had part of the structures collapsed, maybe part of it has been burned for whatever, or maybe there's something going on in the area around your house and staying there is not an option. Well, then you need to be able to get up and go somewhere else. And that means a lot of the preparation that you've made to deal with these emergencies needs to be something you can take with you when you go. You might be going to a shelter that's been set up. You may be going to a family or home or a friend of someone that you can stay with for a while. There may be other options available. In some cases, when they do major evacuations like that, places will rent a hotel and you just put people up in hotel rooms. There we go. Okay. And each of these options calls for a kind of a different set of preparations. There is a little bit of overlap again, but being prepared for both is important and it will help. But let's talk about sheltering in place first. Okay, so sheltering in place means staying at home and having everything you need to survive and move forward with you there. Starting with canned foods and dry foods, stuff that's non-perishable. If your power's out and it's going to be out for an extended period of time, everything in the refrigerator is going to be bad within a day or two. Eat that first. Eat everything you can out of the fridge while it's still usable. But then you want to turn to your canned goods, pasta, rice, beans, flour, salt, sugar, things like that. If you have access to a working oven, you can make bread, you can make cornbread, you can make biscuits. Cooking could become an issue, which is why I've suggested a camp stove. I've got a little 2-burner Coleman stove that runs off of the little green propane bottles that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart or wherever. Those are great for cooking on. I did some reading and some research on using that indoors. Some people said you can set it on top of your stove top and that way it vents through your stove vent that's over that. Others didn't recommend that. I'm kind of on the fence about it, so I'm not going to say use it that way. I would say be safer, especially considering that you're in the middle of a crisis situation anyway. We don't want to make it worse. Do your cooking out in the garage or on the back patio or on the porch or something. It might be a little bit more inconvenient, but at the end of the day, it's going to be safer. Absolutely under no circumstances ever set up a charcoal grill inside your house. That's kind of a guaranteed way to get carbon monoxide poisoning, possibly start a fire, and then now you've taken a crisis and turned it into a major emergency there. But you can cook in a stove, like a cook pot, on a charcoal grill. Just set it right on top of the grate. You can boil water, you can cook pasta, you can cook beans or whatever. Yeah, your pans are going to get a little black and a little sooty, but that can clean off eventually. Okay. You want to make sure you have flashlights around the house and replacement batteries, because batteries run down in flashlights pretty quickly. I would say avoid candles simply because of the fire risk. If you're using a lot of candles in the house for light, that's just a handful of little fires waiting to get out and go somewhere else, especially if you have little ones around that are running around and grabbing a hold of stuff and, you know, just being kids like they do. You want to keep a battery pack for your phone, and I'll show you what I'm talking about because I've got one in here. I'm talking about a rechargeable battery pack that you can use to recharge your phones and your devices. I bought this one off Amazon years ago for probably about 20-25 bucks. I can take my cell phone, my iPhone, all the way down to 0 charge, recharge it again on this 4 times. So the bigger they are, the heavier, the denser they are, the more juice they have in them. I typically keep this plugged in at home so that it's always charged. The downside to that is in the case where power is out, when this goes dead, you're done. I have seen similar units online that are solar powered. You lay it out on the picnic table out in the backyard, let it get full sunlight, it charges up, then you can charge your phone. They're not very expensive. You also want to, well, I'll go over more of the go bag later on. Okay. You also want to get, you probably would be a good idea to find a little transistor AM FM radio and extra batteries for that as well. Again, major issue with power outages. The only way you're going to really have a good idea of what's going on around you is radio news. TV stations probably aren't going to be broadcasting because most people don't have a battery powered TV set. A lot of people do have battery powered radios. And most of the radio stations have generators so they can transmit even if the power is out. And the government agencies that respond to emergencies and disasters, they use those radio stations to get the word out to people. You'll want to listen to those on a regular basis because that's where evacuation orders come out. That's where information about shelters and other assistance are going to be. Okay? Drinking water. You're going to want to stash a supply of drinking water somewhere in your house. I would suggest for every adult in the house, you want to get like a case of half-liter bottles like this size. 20, 24 of them. Put them in a closet somewhere where they're not going to get super hot. You don't want to put them out in the garage. When these bottles get hot, the plastic breaks down and you leach chemicals into the water that aren't healthy. But you want to keep it somewhere in the house where it's safe and cool and you can easily get to it. And rotate it out about every 5 or 6 months. At one point, I usually kept 2 or 3 in the closet and I was drinking out of the one on the top. And when it was gone, I'd buy another one, put it at the bottom of the stack. So you just kind of keep it fresh that way. Cooking, using these for cooking is not really efficient because you're dumping 4 or 5 bottles into a pan. So at the same time, it would be good to get maybe 3 or 4 gallon jugs of drinking water. And when you go through that, when you're done with it, you can use the jugs to get fresh water if you have to. If you have access to a swimming pool, do not use the swimming pool for drinking or cooking. Chemicals in the pool water aren't really safe and healthy, and there's just not a practical, easy way to purify that water at home. You can use the pool water for washing yourselves, washing your dishes. You can use it to flush your toilet. The easiest way to do that is if you've got a big 5-gallon plastic bucket, keep a bucket next to the toilet. When you're done doing whatever you do, just dump a little bit of water right into the bowl and it'll automatically flush. If you really, really like pushing the button on your toilet or the handle, fill the tank up and flush. It's the same effect. Okay. Emergency cash. I know I mentioned earlier that in a situation like this, your ATM might not be working. You may not be able to use your EBT card or your debit card or anything. So it's a good idea to pull a little bit of cash out and stash it somewhere in the house. It's not, and I will be the worst one to say this about myself, it's really hard not to go grab money out of that stash when you need it and when things are short. But you want to keep it someplace where you're not going to access it very easily and it's not going to get lost. Yes, ma'am.
How much cash would you suggest?
A lot's going to depend on your budget and your needs and how many people you have in your family. When I do this on a regular basis, which I've been bad about it, I'm trying to get back to where I should be. I try to keep $100.
Okay.
Most of it in 20s, but some smaller bills just because. And I actually keep that money in my go bag, and we'll go over the go bag here in a little bit, rather than in the house. Because for the purpose of the go bag is when you got to go, you grab the bag and you go. If you've got your cash stuck in your underwear drawer and you grab the bag and you get out of the house, you get down the road and you go, I got no money, it's all back in my underwear. Underwear is nice and safe, but yes.
So say like an earthquake happened
Yeah.
and your house collapsed.
Uh-huh.
You know, all the beautiful little water bottles we collected went to perish.
Yeah.
God
Okay.
forbid, right?
Yeah. So what you're talking about is not a shelter-in-place situation. That's going to be a relocate, evacuate. So, yes, you're going to put this stuff in your house and you're going to have it there. There is the possibility that you're not ever going to get to use it because, like you said, the house falls down or it burns down. But when you're doing emergency and disaster planning, you do want to think about worst-case scenarios. You also want to think about less than. So, if we talk about a disaster and how bad it is in terms of, a scale from 1 to 10, and 1 is life is just as usual and nothing's changed, and 10 is everything's obliterated. If you plan for 10, you're great, because if you only get a 6 or a 7, you've got what you need. If you plan for 4 and you get a 6 or a 7, now you're in a bad situation.
So the one time overthinking comes in handy.
Exactly. Okay, so moving on. Talk a little bit more about water sources. And water is such an important thing because you can go for days and days and days without food. Some of us can go for even longer than that. But you go 3 days without fresh water to drink and you're in serious danger at that point in time. So fresh water, having water to drink is crucially important. So that's why we spend a little bit more time on it. So we talked about keeping a case of water. Gallon jugs are useful for washing and cooking. You can save the jugs and you refill them if you have a water source. Don't use pool water. We talked about that. If you hear an announcement or if you hear word from somebody that says, hey, the water supply that's coming out of the tap is contaminated, you're supposed to boil the water before you use it. Okay. If you get that kind of an announcement, what you want to do is get a pan of water, nice clear. Don't you do this if the water's got stuff floating in it. But if you've got cool, clear water, put it on the stove, get it hot, get it good to a good rolling boil like you would for making spaghetti or macaroni or something like that. When it's good and boiling, time it 1 minute. Let it boil for 1 minute. That's going to kill any of the germs or viruses or parasites or anything that might be in there that you can't see. Once that's done, set it aside, let it cool, and then you can pour it back into something like your leftover gallon jugs or whatever to use later on. I've heard that if you boil water like that to purify it, that sometimes it'll have an odd taste to it because you're boiling the oxygen and the other things that are dissolved. The easiest way to fix that is if you've got 2 pans, just pour it back and forth between the 2 pans a little bit. That'll help cool it down. That'll also help to aerate it and bring back that natural kind of water taste to it. Okay? All right. And moving on. So the next option for dealing with your emergency crisis situation is an evacuator shelter or evacuator relocate. So if something happens, like your house collapses or there's a flood coming or any of a number of situations that need you to get out of the house and be gone, you want to keep around someplace out in the open where you can grab it quickly and easily, what we call a go bag. And I've actually brought my go bag in to show you what I'm talking about. And if you go all the way to the very back of this handout, there's a list of items it's my personal list of what I put in my go bag. It's definitely not an end-all, be-all. There are certainly things that could be added to the list. There may be things there that don't necessarily apply to you, but I do kind of want to show you what I've got, okay? It's probably a good idea to have a separate bag for everybody in the house because if there's 3 or 4, I mean, this is, you can see this thing is stuffed pretty full, and this is just for me. So if you've got kids, you've got little ones, you might want to have a separate bag for them. If you have a partner in the house with you, one for each of you. And the idea is when you've got to get up and go on the way out of the door, you grab the bag. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
What about pets?
That's a tough one. I was thinking about that actually. I was thinking if I have a fire at my place and I've got to get out of the house, on the way out of the door, I'm grabbing the bag and the cat. Dealing with your pets, it's kind of a hard choice to make. A human life is always higher value than an animal. We love our pets. I love my guy to death. I would hate to lose him, but if it was a choice between me or him, hasta la vista. Yes, ma'am.
So I know with pets it's recommended, and you go back to also have animal food.
Yeah,
for
take a
3
little bit of
days.
food.
Yeah,
Take a little bit of, bag up a little bit of dog food or cat
The
food or
cats is
whatever.
not all that much.
Yeah,
Dogs.
I would say get dry food
Dry food, right.
because it's going to be a lot easier to deal with.
Same with medications for
Yeah,
animals.
exactly,
If they are having
exactly. So going down my list of goodies in the go bag. I missed a piece there on this also. You want to before all this happens, you want to have a meetup plan or a call plan with the people that you live with and also with family away from the house, so that if you have to leave and you're not all together, you've got a spot to meet, a rally point, so to speak. So that if you and your partner's at work when everything goes down, you're at home. You have to leave the house for whatever reason. Your partner knows that he can go to, or that she can go to this place, and expect to find you there if that happens. Again, keep in mind, major disaster, cell phones might not be working, probably won't be working. And if they are working, they're going to be overloaded. A lot of the circuits are just going to be, because everybody's going to call everybody else, hey, did you feel that? Are you okay? What happened? So on and so forth. And I don't know about other cell companies, but I know that AT&T at least, they have a system set up that in the event of a disaster like that, they can flip a switch on the computer that controls the cell lines, and cell phone numbers that are registered to emergency responders like police and sheriffs and fire, those phone lines get priority, and they can actually bump another call off the system if the system's overloaded. So it might be harder to make calls. So have a plan of where you're going to meet after the fact, but do that before everything happens. That way, if worse comes to worse, you're not at home, they're looking for you. We know, they're going to be over there at that park, or we're going to meet at this place somewhere else. Make it close by so you're not trying to spend 3 days getting there. But anyway, going through the list of stuff in the go bag: change of clothes and a pair of shoes. I have a pair of jeans. I've got my ratty old tennis shoes in here that I can wear anywhere I feel comfortable with. I've got a long sleeve t-shirt. My winter coat hangs on a peg by the door year round, 365 days a year. So that way, as I'm going out the door, if it's cold enough that I need a jacket, I can grab it when I go. I don't have to go find it in a closet someplace. Okay. Extra socks and underwear. I've got one change of clothes in there, and I can wear those jeans for a week if I have to. Ditto on the t-shirt. I can deal with that. I can't wear the same pair of underwear for a week. Okay? So I have 2 or 3 pairs of underwear and 2 or 3 pairs of socks. If you can change your underwear and your socks every other day, you're going to be a whole lot happier, a lot more comfortable. You're probably not going to smell as bad. Bathing might be an issue during this time frame. So there we go. Anyway. Wet wipes. I'm talking about just a little, like a handy wipe thing, like you would use for a diaper for a kid, or just to clean your hands. Not necessarily a sanitizing wipe, but just something to help you get clean. And you probably want to go with the kind that are individually packaged, like in a little envelope, simply because those are easier to manage. If you have like the kind that are in a tub or a bottle, that may leak inside your go bag. Plus, it takes up a ton of room. I've got a handful in here. I'll show you those in a few minutes. Non-perishable snacks, nuts, trail bars, trail mix, things like that are easy to store and will last for a long time. Avoid anything with chocolate in it. Chocolate's a great energy food, but if you're storing your go bag, it's going to get hot sometimes. Chocolate tends to melt. It gets messy. And also, if it's in storage for a period of time, it tends to break down and it's not very good. So I would say avoid the trail bars and things that have chocolate in them. You want to look for something that's high protein, high fiber, not a whole lot of, not as much sugar as possible. Okay. We already talked about the battery pack and cables. Take extra cables because charge cables die on a regular basis. I mean, I have to replace mine about twice a year, it seems like. Okay. Flashlight with extra batteries. I've got my nice little LED light there that shines up pretty good. I've got an extra set of batteries for it somewhere. I forgot to put them in the bag this morning. I'm bad. I'm sorry. You want to have matches or a lighter, simply because you might need to be someplace and, you know, instead of building or start a fire, I'm saying, excuse me, for cooking or warmth or whatever, if it's safe. But having those things handy is important. Back to the AM/FM radio. That's the same radio we were talking about if you're going to shelter in place. It's going to give you an idea of what's going on around you, where you might be able to find shelter, where you might be able to find assistance of some kind, areas that you want to stay out of. Your emergency cache. When we talked about having that in the house to stay shelter in place, I would suggest if you do that for the house, put your emergency cache in your go bag, because you want to have it in the bag when you go. But if you're at home and you're able to stay at home, you know it's in the bag, you can go to it and get it. Ziploc bags, assorted sizes. Ziploc bags are one of the greatest tools ever invented, as far as I'm concerned. Years ago, when I used to take fourth graders on field trips, I had my go bag in my classroom. I always took the go bag on the field trip because you just never know, right? And we were on a bus to Ventura, and a fourth grader who had a huge bag of hot Cheetos and about a gallon of Gatorade for lunch decided that he was going to start throwing it up on the bus. And I was able to grab a gallon Ziploc bag out of my bag real quick, hand it to him. He puked in the bag. When he was done, I zipped it up. Crisis averted. Trust me, you don't ever want to be on a bus full of fourth graders where somebody's throwing up. It's a thing. But I keep in here, I've got a gallon Ziploc bag with a handful of quart bags and sandwich bags in it. You can buy cheap economy bags, but for this, I would say get the best bags you can buy. They're thicker, they zip up, they seal better.
Comfortable.
It's just a little bit more reliable, okay? Also, keep a couple of trash bags. I have a couple of regular kitchen trash bags and your basic grocery bags. The grocery bags you're getting from Vons and Albertsons and Target and whatnot these days, a much heavier grade bag. They last really well. They're great for carrying extra things. A bag is always just a useful thing to have. Utility knife. I'm not talking about something that is like a weapon grade to stab somebody with. I'm just talking about a basic knife that you might need to open a box or a package or something like that. Easy to keep, easy to use, but they're also very safe to keep in a bag like this. First aid supplies. You don't need anything really extensive. You don't want a big, massive first aid kit. You basically want to have a few gauze pads, a little bit of tape or a wrap of some kind, some antibiotic cream, something like Neosporin, maybe some aspirin, Tylenol, Aleve, whatever your pain reliever is of choice, a few Band-Aids, just basics that you have to deal with minor injuries, okay? Moving on to your medication, stuff that if you're taking something on a regular basis, you want to keep a 1 week supply in your bag and just have it there for whenever you're, when things go down. Keep them in one of these. I keep mine in here too. You also want to have a list of the medications that you're taking and have that written down so that, if you end up at an emergency room or a clinic or someplace, they're going to ask, what are you taking? You may not be able to answer real clearly. You may not have everything in your head, but if you've got the whole thing printed out on a list, you can hand it to them and say, this is it. Or if somebody's with you, you can point them to the bag and get it there. If you have little ones, you need a separate bag for them. Baby formula, diapers, wipes, extra clothes for them. So if you've got little ones, you've got a go bag, they've got a go bag. If the bag's small enough, you can put it on their backpack, on their back like a backpack, and let them carry it. Otherwise, well, that's parenthood, right? Important documents. I threw that in there. I don't necessarily have those for myself, but it might not be a bad idea. Things like birth certificates, social security cards, insurance cards. If you have court documents describing custody or visitation agreements and such, you might want to hold on to those, keep them close, especially if you're having to evacuate. Those things aren't going to be easily accessible in a crisis like this, so having them at hand could become important.
At least a copy.
At least a copy of them, exactly. And also a pen or a pencil and a notepad of some kind. I'm a big fan of the 3x5 note card. When I used to run a school, when I walked around on the yard, I had 5 or 6 of these in my pocket all the time. If I had to stop and talk to somebody and needed to jot some information down, the nice thing about note cards is they're nice and stiff, so you can write on them while you're standing. You may come across information of some kind, addresses, phone numbers, stuff that you need to go deal with, and if you have a way to write it down, then you've got it there and it's handy. Okay. On to being prepared in the moment. This is what we are going to do when stuff happens. When things are falling apart around you, the big earthquake hits, buildings are falling down, roadways are falling down, everything's on fire. Okay, your immediate reaction, really response to whatever's happening, is going to depend on what it is that's happening, okay? So if your emergency is confined to your home, let's say you have a fire or some other incident that impacts your house, call 911. That's the first thing. That's always your first response to an emergency, is pick up the phone, call 911. Stay on the phone with the dispatcher until they tell you it's okay to hang up. I have a friend who's a dispatcher, and she says one of the worst things that they deal with is people calling in and saying, hey, I need help, I've got this going on, blah, 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 and then they hang up the phone. And they don't have all the information that they need to send help to you where you are. So stay on the phone with them. A lot of times they'll give you instructions or directions how to deal with things. If somebody's injured, they can walk you through first aid. If somebody has had a heart attack and their heart stopped beating, they can talk you through doing CPR. I've had that happen to me, so I mean, it's a thing. Stay on the phone with them until they tell you it's okay to hang up, which usually will be when emergency services pull up and they say, do you see the ambulance out front? Yes. Go meet them out there. You can hang up the phone now. That's what they'll tell you. Always do exactly what they tell you to do. If they tell you to go get out of the house, get out of the house. Oh, it's dark and scary outside. Don't worry, get out of the house. They tell you to stay inside, stay inside. Listen to the dispatchers. They know what they're talking about. Always in any situation like this, think about your own personal safety and security. Think about what you're doing. Don't just run off in circles and become part of the problem. You know, you want to think about, if I go outside, is this going to make things worse? If I stay here, think about what could possibly happen before you make a decision and take action. If the problem is in the house, obviously, get outside. If the problem is outside, stay inside. If the problem's outside, you don't need to be out there watching it. So just stay in the house. And avoid getting involved in things that are going on, especially outdoors. Like I said, don't become part of the problem. Don't become a victim when you don't need to be. Okay? All right. So, in the middle of your emergency or disaster, use your radio. Turn that radio on. Listen to what's going on. There will be news. There will be announcements about stuff. You may hear evacuation orders. You may hear other plans. The officials telling you what you need to do next. If an evacuation order comes down, grab your go bag and go. One of the biggest causes the loss of life and injury in disaster areas are people being told that they should evacuate and they don't. They stay because they think, oh, I can handle this. I've heard about people in the South holding hurricane parties, having a party while the hurricane's blowing outside. Because they don't think it's going to hit them that hard, and inevitably it does. So if they tell you to go, go. If the disaster you're facing is a major earthquake, you want to do something called duck and cover. If you've got a solid heavy table like one of these, you can get under the table, protect your head. That'll keep things that are falling from landing on you. One of the things that they used to tell us, I remember growing up and going to school and hearing this, in case of an earthquake, get in a doorway. That's not the case. They've found out that that's not the safest place inside a building. In fact, inside a doorway can be very dangerous because the doorway is open. The doorway itself might be fairly strong, but the doorway's open on both sides. And if stuff is falling, it's coming at you from two different directions. The actual safest place in a building during an earthquake is in a corner. In a corner, or even just up against a wall, get down low, protect your head. Because if the building does collapse or partially collapse, if things are falling, it's going to fall at an angle and create what's called a survivable space. So if you think about being tucked in, don't get underneath the TV because the TV can fall. Think about things that could fall on your head. But if you back into a corner and you get down, you've got walls going this way. If stuff falls, it's going to be in front of you, but you're going to be in a survivable space. You might get hurt. You're probably going to get stuff falling on you, but again, the ideal spot is either up against a wall or backed into a corner. Yes, ma'am.
What if you live like in an upstairs?
Same thing, and hope that your upstairs stays upstairs.
The only reason why I say it is because when we had an earthquake a couple years ago,
Yeah.
I was living upstairs and it was weird because we went to the door frame.
Feel it moving, yeah.
And then you could
yeah.
feel the whole building
Yeah.
just moving.
Most of the buildings that have been built in, at least in Kern County in the last 30 or 40 years are probably pretty earthquake safe, earthquake resistant. The best kind of building to be in an earthquake is a wood frame building because they flex. They flex and they move, but they don't fall down unless it's a really, 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 really bad earthquake. Second best is what's called reinforced masonry, which is a brick type building, but there's a lot of steel rebar and other stuff in the building that, in the front structure that strengthen it. The problem with stacking bricks with mortar between them, they don't flex. And if they don't flex, when they move, they fall apart and they fall down. Exactly. So this building is, I'm hoping, is reinforced masonry, because if that happens to hit while I'm here at work, I'm gonna be out the door real fast. Don't go outside during an earthquake. If you're feeling that shaking, like I said, find your corner, find your wall, find your spot, get under a table. Don't run outside, because if things are falling, like from buildings or trees or whatnot, you're not protected out there. You're not out in the open. If you're out in the open when it happens, obviously get still, get down on the ground, protect your head, avoid anything that's falling if you can. Be aware of what's going on around you. If you're at home when the earthquake hits, once the shaking is stopped and things have calmed down and your heart stops racing and you can breathe normally, get out and walk around. Do a walk around the outside of your house looking for any kind of damage or anything that's going on. Do the same thing throughout the inside of your house. You really want to pay attention to looking for the smell of gas, natural gas. If you smell gas, especially inside the house, get out of the house right now. Don't hesitate, don't delay. Grab your go bag, get outside in the front yard, get everybody else outside. Do not turn on light switches. Don't even open the refrigerator door, because any electric switch turning on, turning off can generate a small spark. And if you've got a gas leak in the house and it fills the gas with house, small spark turns into a great big boom. And then your roof is gone, your walls are gone, your windows are gone, you're gone. So don't do that, okay? If you do smell gas, you want to try to shut off your gas valve. I probably should have put a picture of a gas valve in here so you know what it looks like, but you can get on Google how do I turn off gas in my house and find that. Usually what you'll find next to the gas meter on the pipe is a little round kind of a structure on there, and there's a rectangle that is the knob that actually turns the valve. If the rectangle is in line with the pipe, that means your gas is on. You want to put a wrench on that and turn it about 90 degrees so that the rectangle is crossways on the pipe. That means the gas is off. You can actually get an emergency wrench at Home Depot or Lowe's. I used to have one. I kept it tied with a piece of wire to the gas meter. That way, if I had to run out there and shut the gas off in an emergency, I'm not going through the garage and digging through 19 toolboxes trying to find one odd little tool. It's right there. You grab it, you turn it off. If you do have to shut your gas off, do not turn it back on until the gas company comes out and inspects everything and says it's okay. All right? Trying to get through this before I run out of time. I'm sorry. All right. And we've already kind of mentioned part of this. Be aware that emergency services in a major disaster like this are going to be overwhelmed. They may not be able to respond quickly to your situation if you can even get a hold of them. They may not be able to respond at all. If you're dialing 911 and nothing's going through, set it aside, give it a couple of minutes, try again. Just keep trying. It may take a while. If cell towers are out of service or they might be overwhelmed, they shut down, they limit calls. So if you do have to make a call, make it something important. You probably don't need to call your 27 friends and talk about how the earthquake felt. You probably do want to call family or friends out of state and let them know you're okay. Actually, oddly enough, in situations like this, out-of-state calls tend to go through better than local calls. Don't know why, it's just a quirk of the system. Listen to the news reports on your radio as often as you can. Probably don't want to turn the radio on and leave it on 24/7 because that's just going to eat up your batteries. But it is a good idea to check it, like say every hour on the hour, just to see if there's any new announcements or any new news going on. Okay? All right. Moving on to recovery. When things settle down, you can start cleaning up. But be aware of possible dangers and hazards that are out there. Things like down power lines, broken water pipes, broken gas lines or whatnot. If you come across any of these things, don't try to deal with them yourself. Stay away from them, leave them alone. Notify someone, call 911 or call whoever you can call, or flag down a cop if you see him going by and say, hey, there's a power line down here. There's a system set up to get that stuff fixed. Okay? Phones may come back on quickly after an earthquake. They might not. There might be a little bit. Could be a few days. Could be longer. The state of California has set up a number of disaster assistance agencies, and that's what these two packets on the back of your stuff is about. I'm not going to go through that because there's a whole lot of information there, but these things would be very helpful after the fact. For just getting through recovery, everything from financial assistance to food to housing support, so on and so forth. Also, the local Red Cross is a good resource in an emergency, in a disaster. They will typically be setting up shelters and setting up food kitchens to feed people. They can also help if you lose your home to a fire. For some reason, that's a special gig for them. If your house burns down and you've got no place to go, you've got nothing else, go to Red Cross. They can give you some information. They can give you some guidance and some help there. That's the, Red Cross's phone number and address here in Bakersfield. And with that, I'm pretty much done with my presentation. Do we have any questions? And you want me to go through the go bag and show you everything I have? Okay. All right. I'm amazed that I can stuff everything in here sometimes. Oh, like I said,
Nuts.
mixed nuts. I got to keep those away from Stephanie. She's got a thing about those. I do my own. I make my own. I just go to Winco and just go through the bulk tubs and pull out things that I like to see in a bag of nuts. It's a lot cheaper and I get stuff I like. Yes.
So, like, what about a sleeping bag?
Sleeping bags are good. They're kind of bulky. If you've got one and you need to go, take it with you, definitely.
And thankfully in Bakersfield the climate is somewhat
Yeah,
mild.
climate's
It's probably
mild.
different if you would live in Colorado, where you have concerns about freezing and things like that. Thankfully Bakersfield.
Yeah. I do have I've got a little blanket that I keep. It's not really big. It's not super big. It's not, it's not real thick and heavy, but you know, better than nothing. Absolutely. I don't know how I left this off the list. This is
Oh,
gold.
toilet paper.
This is gold. I have friends who served. I have friends who served in Vietnam, and I also have friends that served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those guys talked about how they would kill somebody for a roll of toilet paper at times. And if you have some, you keep it close and you keep it safe. And if somebody needs some and you're going to share, they owe you big. So this could be gold, literally. Okay, so here I'm talking about not having chocolate in your snack bag, and I've got your chocolate. But I've also got a Cliff Bars are good because they're real high in protein, high in fiber, which is something important you need to have. There's my collection of Ziploc bags. Oh, and my handy wipes. So, you know, something in an individual wipe like this. Okay. And you can get them by the box at like Target or CVS. Yes?
And first aid?
First aid. I don't have a first aid kit in here. I used to keep a really well
There's like
stocked.
tiny ones too.
Yeah, you can get really small ones, or you can just, you know, like I said, pick up a box of gauze pads, a roll of gauze, a roll of first aid tape, some antibiotic ointment like Neosporin or something, a handful of Walmart or CVS. Exactly.
Pretty much everything. But
Yeah, you can buy a pre-made kit. You don't need to get a super big one. You don't need to spend a lot on it, or you can just kind of build your own, which is what I usually end up doing. A towel. Towel is crucial. I mean, towel you can use. You can roll your towel up and use it as a pillow. You're gonna get wet. You're gonna need to dry off. You want to get clean. This is gonna make it work. Anybody ever see Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Because the number one rule of traveling through the universe is never leave home without your towel. It's the thing. And my jeans, and my shoes down there in the bottom. And if you know how to pack, you know that you shove your underwear and your socks into your shoes. Save space that way. And then I've got my cards and a pen, and I've got my flashlight and my medicine. I've got extra cables. I also brought an extra cable. I put an extra cable in here to charge this thing if I have access to an outlet. So that works. Trying to think of what else I have in here. My knife and my lighter. I've got a couple of bottles of water. And that's pretty much it. It works. Does what I need it to do. I've never had to use it. Which I'm okay with. I'm okay with never having to grab a bag and run and hide for 3 days. But I do tend to take it with me when I travel. I'll throw it in the car just because.
Even if you forget something. Right?
Yeah, even if I forget. Yeah, if I forget something, or you know, if you're out and about, you're on the road, and you know, you have a accident with the car, or, you know. And if I'm traveling anywhere more than about 30 or 40 miles from home, this is usually in the car. Okay? All right. Thank you much. Any other questions? And I'm happy to answer anything down the road if anybody else wants to talk about disaster and emergency prep. It's a thing. I've done a little bit of study on it. I used to teach it at the schools, and happy to help.
Thank you so much, Jeff. You guys all have a great day.
Mama.